My son looked me dead in the eyes and said, "You're never getting back in this house, old man. This is mine now." He slammed the door in my face and locked it. I could hear him laughing inside with his drug dealer friends, celebrating how they'd just made his own father homeless. But Marcus made one fatal mistake, because 48 hours later, his evil plan backfired. But before we continue, subscribe to this video and drop a comment where you are listening from. Now, let me start from the beginning. My name is Robert Chin, and I'm 58 years old. I built my construction business from nothing, working 80-hour weeks for 3 decades to provide for my family. My wife Sarah passed away from cancer 5 years ago, and since then, it's just been me and my son Marcus. I thought I was being a good father. After Sarah died, Marcus was struggling with depression and couldn't hold down a job. So I let him move back into the family home, the 4-bedroom house I had paid off years ago in the suburbs of Phoenix. I figured he needed time to get back on his feet, and what kind of father would I be if I didn't help my only child during his darkest hour? That was my first mistake. For 2 years, Marcus lived in my house rent-free. I paid for groceries, utilities, internet, everything. I even gave him an allowance of $500 a month so he wouldn't feel completely dependent. I thought I was helping him rebuild his confidence. Instead, I was enabling what would become the worst betrayal of my life. Marcus started bringing friends over constantly. At first, it was just for dinner or to watch movies. But then they started staying overnight. Then for days at a time. My house became a flophouse for a bunch of 20-something losers who treated the place like their personal party headquarters. I tried talking to Marcus about it. "Son," I said, "I don't mind your friends visiting, but this is getting out of hand. They're leaving messes, eating all the food, and some of them are doing drugs in the backyard." His response: "Dad, you're being paranoid. We're just hanging out. Besides, you said this was my home too." That should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. I loved my son, and I wanted to believe he was just going through a phase. Things escalated over the next few months. Marcus's friends became more disrespectful. They would eat food I had specifically bought for myself, leave dirty dishes everywhere, and play loud music until 3 a.m. When I complained, Marcus would get defensive and accuse me of being controlling. "You're trying to run my life like I'm still 12 years old," he would say. "I'm an adult, Dad. I can make my own decisions." But the final straw came 6 months ago. I came home from a job site to find one of Marcus's friends, a guy named Tyler with face tattoos and a criminal record, shooting up heroin in my kitchen. When I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "Relax, old man." Marcus said this was cool. That night, I sat Marcus down for the most serious conversation of our relationship. "Son, this has to stop. I can't have drug users in my house. You need to tell your friends they can't come over anymore, and you need to start contributing to the household or find your own place." Marcus's face darkened in a way I had never seen before. "Are you threatening to kick me out? I'm asking you to be responsible. This is my house, Marcus. I've been more than generous, but there have to be boundaries." What he said next still haunts me. "Actually, Dad, I've been doing some research. Since I've been living here for over 2 years and contributing to household expenses, I have tenant rights. You can't just kick me out. This is legally my residence now." I stared at my son in disbelief. "Marcus, I'm your father. This is my house. I'm not your landlord." He smiled coldly. "Actually, that's exactly what you are. And good luck trying to evict me. The process takes months, and I know you don't have the stomach for a legal battle against your only son." That was the moment I realized my boy was gone. The sweet kid who used to build model airplanes with me had been replaced by a calculating manipulator who was using my love against me. But I still tried to make it work. For 3 more months, I tolerated the chaos, hoping Marcus would come to his senses. Instead, things got worse. His friends became more brazen, treating me like an unwelcome guest in my own home. They would mock me openly, make fun of my age, and act like I was some doddering old fool who didn't deserve respect. Marcus did nothing to defend me. In fact, he seemed to enjoy watching his father being humiliated. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago. I had been working a particularly difficult job, renovating a historic building downtown, and I was exhausted. All I wanted was to come home, eat a quiet dinner, and watch some TV. Instead, I found 20 people in my house having what they called a rager. The music was deafening. There were beer bottles and drug paraphernalia everywhere. Someone had vomited on my leather couch, the same couch Sarah and I had saved up for years to buy. When I tried to turn down the music, one of Marcus's friends shoved me and called me a pathetic old loser. I looked around for my son, expecting him to stand up for his father. Instead, I found Marcus in the kitchen, counting a stack of money. "What's that?" I asked. "Cover charges," he said without looking up. $20 a head. This party's going to pay for groceries for the next month. I couldn't believe it. "You're charging people to party in my house." "Our house, Dad." "And yeah, why shouldn't I make some money? You're always complaining about expenses." That night, after everyone left and I was cleaning up the destruction they had caused, I made a decision. This couldn't continue. I was going to have to take drastic action. I started by consulting with a lawyer about eviction procedures. What Marcus had said was partially true. Because I had let him establish residency, evicting him would require a formal legal process. But the lawyer also told me something interesting. Since I was the sole owner of the property and Marcus had never paid actual rent, there might be other options. That's when I started planning. The next week, I tried one more time to reason with Marcus. I sat him down and explained that I was considering selling the house and moving to a smaller place. It was a bluff, but I wanted to see how he would react. His response was swift and vicious. "You're not selling anything, old man. I've got rights here, and I'm not going anywhere. In fact, maybe it's time you started paying me rent for living in my space." "Your space?" I couldn't hide my shock. "Yeah, my space. I've been thinking about this, and I deserve compensation for all the work I've been doing around here." "What work?" "You don't do anything but throw parties and make messes." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I maintain this property, Dad. I keep the lawn mowed, I fix things when they break. That's worth at least $800 a month. Plus, you've been living here without contributing to my household expenses." The audacity was breathtaking. This was my house, that I had worked 3 decades to pay for, and my son was trying to charge me rent to live in it. But I kept my cool. "Marcus, I think you're confused about how property ownership works." "Am I?" "Because I've been documenting everything, Dad. Every improvement I've made, every expense I've covered. I've got a lawyer friend who says I might have a case for claiming partial ownership based on sweat equity and financial contribution." That's when I realized this wasn't just entitlement or immaturity. This was a calculated attack on everything I had worked for. My own son was trying to steal my house from under me. I decided to test him. "Okay, Marcus. If that's how you feel, maybe I should move out for a while. Give you some space to think about what you really want." His face lit up. "Actually, Dad, that might be for the best. You could stay at a hotel for a few weeks while we figure this out." "And my belongings?" Well, most of the furniture and stuff has been here so long, it's practically mine anyway. But don't worry, I'll take good care of everything. I nodded slowly. I see. And when would you like me to leave? How about tonight? I've got some friends coming over, and it would be easier if you weren't here. That was it. The last thread of hope that my son might come to his senses snapped. He wasn't just disrespecting me, he was actively trying to steal my life from me. All right, Marcus. I'll pack a bag and leave tonight. The smile that spread across his face was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen. My own child was celebrating the prospect of getting rid of his father. But what Marcus didn't know was that I had been recording our conversation on my phone. And what he really didn't know was that his few weeks of freedom were about to become the biggest nightmare of his life. I left that night with a single suitcase, making sure Marcus saw me drive away. But I didn't go to a hotel. Instead, I drove to my friend Bill's house across town. Bill had been my business partner for 15 years, and when I explained the situation, he immediately offered me his guest room. Jesus, Rob, he said. Your own kid is trying to steal your house. Looks that way. But don't worry, I've got a plan. Over the next 3 days, I watched my house from a distance. Just as I expected, Marcus threw a massive party the very first night I was gone. Cars were parked all over my lawn, music was blasting until dawn, and I could see people going in and out all night long. On the second day, I saw something that made my blood boil. Marcus was outside with 2 guys I didn't recognize, and they were loading my tools into a truck. These were professional-grade construction tools worth over $15,000, tools I had collected over decades of work. I called Marcus immediately. What are you doing with my tools? Oh, hey Dad. Yeah, Tyler knows a guy who needs some equipment for a job. I figured I'd rent them out and split the money with you. You know, help with expenses. Those tools are not for rent, Marcus. They're my livelihood. Relax, Dad. They'll be back in a few days. Besides, you're not working any jobs right now anyway. Bring them back. Now. I can't do that. They're already at the job site. Look, I'll call you when they're done, okay? He hung up on me. That's when I knew there was no going back. My son wasn't just disrespecting me, he was stealing from me. And if I didn't act fast, I was going to lose everything I had worked for. On the 3rd day, I drove back to my house to get some clothes I had forgotten. But when I got to the front door and tried to use my key, it didn't work. I tried the back door, same thing. I checked every window and door I could reach, but everything was locked tight. Then I heard laughter from inside. I knocked on the front door, and Marcus answered with that same smirk. Hey Dad. What's up? Why don't my keys work? Oh, yeah. I had the locks changed. For security reasons, you know. There's been a lot of break-ins in the neighborhood lately. Marcus, this is my house. I need to get inside. Actually, Dad, I've been thinking about our situation, and I don't think it's a good idea for you to come back right now. You've been really stressed lately, and I'm worried about your mental health. Maybe you should stay with Uncle Bill for a while longer. I stared at my son in disbelief. You're locking me out of my own house. I'm protecting both of us from a potentially volatile situation. You've been acting erratic lately, and my friends feel uncomfortable when you're around. Your friends feel uncomfortable? In my house? Marcus shrugged. Look, Dad, I'll call you in a few days when things calm down. Maybe we can work something out. And then he closed the door in my face. I stood there in the rain, because of course it started raining at that exact moment, watching my son through the window as he walked back to join his friends. They were all laughing, probably at me, the stupid old man who had been outmaneuvered by his own child. But as I stood there getting soaked, something inside me shifted. The hurt and confusion I had been feeling transformed into something much more powerful, cold, calculated rage. Marcus thought he had won, but he had no idea what he had just unleashed. I went back to Bill's house and spent the entire night planning my counterattack. See, Marcus had made a crucial error in his strategy. He was thinking like a spoiled child who had never faced real consequences for his actions. But I was thinking like a businessman who had spent 30 years dealing with contractors, lawyers, and con artists who thought they could outsmart me. The first thing I did was document everything. I had been recording our conversations for weeks, and I had photos of the damage his parties had caused to my property. But more importantly, I had financial records showing that Marcus had never paid rent, never contributed to mortgage payments, and had actually cost me thousands of dollars in damages and stolen property. Then I called my lawyer. "Rob, I've got good news and bad news," he said after I explained the situation. "The bad news is that eviction could take 30 to 60 days. The good news is that since he changed the locks without your permission and is preventing you from accessing your own property, he's committed several felonies." "What kind of felonies?" "Unlawful exclusion from property, theft of services, and potentially extortion if he's demanding money for your return. Plus, if he's stolen your tools, that's grand theft. We're talking about serious prison time." But I didn't want to send my son to prison. Despite everything he had done, he was still my blood. I wanted justice, but I also wanted him to learn a lesson that would stick with him for the rest of his life. That's when I came up with the perfect plan. The next morning, I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report about the stolen tools. I explained that my son had taken them without permission and refused to return them. The officer who took the report was sympathetic. "Sir, even if he's your son, theft is theft. If those tools are worth more than $1,000, this is a felony case." "I understand, officer. I just want my property back." Within 2 hours, police were at my house. I watched from down the street as they knocked on the door and questioned Marcus. I could see him getting agitated, gesturing wildly, probably spinning some story about how he had permission to use the tools. But here's the thing about police reports, they create an official record. And that official record would become very important later. After the police left, Marcus called me, furious. "Dad, you called the cops on me. Your own son. You stole my tools, Marcus. What did you expect? I borrowed them. I told you I was going to rent them out. You took them without permission and refused to return them when I asked. That's theft, son. This is insane. I can't believe you're doing this to me. Bring back my tools, and we can discuss everything else." "Fine. I'll get your precious tools back. But don't expect me to forget this betrayal." He hung up, but I could hear the panic in his voice. Good. He was starting to realize that his actions had consequences. While Marcus was scrambling to return my tools, I was busy with phase 2 of my plan. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Janet who specialized in family disputes and insurance fraud. "I need you to document what's happening at my house," I told her. "My son has locked me out and is using the property for illegal activities. I need evidence." Janet was thorough. Over the next week, she took hundreds of photos and hours of video footage showing the constant stream of people coming and going from my house, the drug use happening in my backyard, and the general destruction of my property. But the most valuable evidence came when she followed Tyler, the guy with face tattoos who had been shooting up in my kitchen. It turned out Tyler was selling drugs from my house, using it as his base of operations while Marcus looked the other way in exchange for a cut of the profits. Your son is running a drug house, Janet told me as she showed me the evidence. He's not just disrespecting you, he's committing felonies that could land him in prison for years. This information gave me enormous leverage, but I still wasn't ready to use it. I wanted Marcus to dig his hole even deeper first. While gathering evidence, I also started making legal moves that Marcus knew nothing about. First, I contacted my homeowner's insurance company and informed them that unauthorized individuals were living in my property and conducting illegal activities. This was important because if anything happened, a fire, an injury, a drug bust, my insurance could deny coverage if I hadn't disclosed the situation. Second, I filed a formal complaint with the city about zoning violations. My house was zoned for single-family residential use, but Marcus was essentially running an unlicensed boarding house. The city inspector who came out was appalled by what he found. Mr. Chen, this property is in violation of at least 12 city ordinances, he told me. Overcroancy, improper waste disposal, noise violations, and evidence of commercial activity in a residential zone. We're going to have to issue citations. What kind of citations? Fines starting at $500 per violation per day until the violations are corrected. Given what I've documented, we're looking at potentially $6,000 per day in fines. Perfect. The legal noose was tightening around Marcus's neck, and he didn't even know it yet. The third legal move was the most important. I contacted a forensic accountant and had him document every penny I had spent supporting Marcus over the past 2 years. Food, utilities, internet, car insurance, medical bills, cash allowances, everything. The total came to $47,000. Now, I asked the accountant, if I had been charging market rate rent for the room he was using, plus utilities and expenses, what would he owe me? The accountant did the math. Based on comparable rentals in your area, and including utilities and the exclusive use of common areas for parties and gatherings, he would owe approximately $84,000 over the 2-year period. So Marcus didn't just owe me money, he owed me a fortune. And I had every receipt, every bank statement, and every bit of documentation to prove it. Now came the hardest part, waiting for Marcus to make the mistake that would give me the opening I needed. I didn't have to wait long. A week after the police visit about my tools, Marcus called me with what he thought was a power move. Dad, I've been thinking about our situation, and I've got a proposal. I'm listening. I'm willing to let you move back into the house, but things are going to have to change. First, you pay me $1,200 a month rent for your room. Second, you don't interfere with my friends or my business activities. Third, you transfer ownership of the house to me within 6 months as compensation for all the improvements I've made. I almost laughed. The audacity was incredible. And if I don't agree to these terms, then you'll have to find somewhere else to live permanently. I've been talking to my lawyer friend, and he says I've got a strong case for adverse possession. Since I've been the primary resident and have been making improvements and paying expenses, I could end up owning the house anyway. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Marcus had just made a formal demand for my property, backed by threats. This wasn't just family drama anymore, this was extortion. Can I have some time to think about it? I asked. Sure, Dad. But don't take too long. I've got plans for this place, and they don't necessarily include you. After he hung up, I called my lawyer immediately. Did you record that conversation? He asked. Every word. Perfect. He just committed extortion and attempted fraud. We've got him. But I still wasn't ready to spring the trap. I wanted to see how far Marcus would go. I wanted him to feel like he had won completely before I destroyed everything he thought he had gained. 3 days later, I called Marcus and told him I was ready to accept his terms. Smart choice, Dad. I knew you'd see reason eventually. When can I move back in? Well, here's the thing. I'm having the basement converted into a separate apartment for you. It'll be more private that way, and you won't have to deal with my friends upstairs. The contractors should be done in about 2 weeks. The basement? Marcus, I've lived in that house for 20 years. The master bedroom is mine. Not anymore, Dad. That's my room now. You can have the basement. It's got its own entrance, so you can come and go without bothering anyone. I felt a surge of rage, but I forced myself to stay calm. And who's paying for this basement conversion? Well, since you're going to be living there, I figured you could cover the costs. It's only about $8,000. So now Marcus wanted me to pay him rent to live in my own basement, and pay for the privilege of having that basement converted into an apartment. The level of manipulation was staggering. All right, son. If that's what it takes. Great. I'll send you the contractor's information. You can wire the money directly to them. Actually, Marcus, I'd like to see the house first. Make sure I'm comfortable with the arrangements. Sure thing. Come by tomorrow around noon. I'll give you the grand tour. That was exactly what I was hoping he would say. The next day, I drove to my house with my lawyer, the private investigator, and a locksmith hidden in the back of my truck. As I approached the front door, I could see Marcus through the window, laughing with 3 of his friends. They were sitting on my furniture, eating food I had paid for, acting like kings of the castle. I knocked on the door, and Marcus answered with a big smile. Hey Dad. Ready to see your new digs? Actually, Marcus, I need to come inside to get some documents from my office. His smile faltered slightly. What documents? Insurance papers, bank statements, that sort of thing. If I'm going to be paying rent and conversion costs, I need to make sure my finances are in order. Marcus hesitated. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. Okay, but make it quick. We've got people coming over soon. He stepped aside to let me in, and that was his final mistake. The moment I crossed the threshold, I pulled out my phone and called 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Robert Chen at 4247 Maple Street. I'm the property owner, and I'm being illegally excluded from my own home by trespassers. Marcus's face went white. Dad, what are you doing? You wanted to play legal games, son. Let's play. His friends started to panic, realizing that the police were coming. Tyler, the drug dealer, immediately started flushing things down the toilet. But it was too late. Janet had already documented everything, and there was evidence of drug activity all over the house. You can't do this. Marcus shouted. I live here. I have rights. Actually, you don't, I said calmly. You see, Marcus, I've spent the last month talking to lawyers, accountants, and investigators. And what I've learned is very interesting. The police arrived within minutes, 2 officers who looked around the house with disgust at the mess and the obvious signs of illegal activity. Sir, are you the property owner? One of them asked me. I am. This is my deed, I said, handing over the paperwork my lawyer had prepared. I am the sole owner of this property. These individuals have been living here without a lease, have excluded me from my own home, and have been conducting illegal activities on my property. Is this true? The officer asked Marcus. He's my father. I live here. Do you have a lease agreement? No, but... Do you pay rent? That's not, the situation is complicated. Sir, the officer said to Marcus, if you don't have a lease and you're not on the deed, then you're a trespasser. You need to gather your belongings and leave immediately. Marcus looked at me with pure hatred. You can't do this to me. This is my home. No, Marcus. This is my home. And you're no longer welcome in it. What happened next was the most satisfying moment of my life. Marcus and his friends were escorted off my property by police. As they gathered their belongings, I stood in my doorway with my arms crossed, watching my son realize that his master plan had completely backfired. But that was just the beginning. Over the next week, the consequences of Marcus's actions came crashing down on him like an avalanche. The city citations I had arranged resulted in $42,000 in fines, all issued in Marcus's name since he had been claiming to be the primary resident. The drug evidence Janet had collected led to charges against Tyler and two of his friends. And the forensic accountant's report became the basis for a civil lawsuit demanding repayment of the $84,000 Marcus owed me for 2 years of unpaid rent and expenses. But the most devastating blow came when I revealed the recordings of our conversations. Marcus's lawyer friend, who turned out to be a first-year law student, not an actual attorney, told him that the extortion charges alone could result in 5 years in prison. Marcus called me, sobbing. "Dad, please. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Can't we work this out?" "You didn't make a mistake, Marcus. You made dozens of calculated decisions to betray, steal from, and humiliate your father. This wasn't an accident, this was a plan. I was angry about Mom dying. I wasn't thinking clearly. Your mother died 5 years ago, son. You can't use grief as an excuse for 2 years of deliberate cruelty. Please, Dad. I'm your only child. You can't destroy my life over this. I'm not destroying your life, Marcus. I'm holding you accountable for your choices. There's a difference. What do you want from me?" That was the question I had been waiting for. "Here's what's going to happen, Marcus. You're going to accept full responsibility for your actions. You're going to issue a public apology to me on social media, acknowledging that you stole from me and disrespected me. You're going to enter a drug rehabilitation program, because I know you've been using. And you're going to get a job and start paying me back every penny you owe. And if I do all that, then I'll consider dropping the criminal charges. But the civil lawsuit stands. You owe me $84,000, and you're going to pay it back with interest. I don't have that kind of money. Then you better get a job. Or 2 jobs. Or 3 jobs. I don't care how long it takes, but you're going to pay back every penny you stole from me." Marcus was crying now. "Dad, please. I can't. I don't know how to do all that." For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. This was still my son, still the little boy I had taught to ride a bike and helped with homework. But then I remembered the look on his face when he closed the door on me in the rain, and my resolve hardened. "You should have thought about that before you decided to steal my house, Marcus. Actions have consequences. It's time you learned that." Marcus agreed to my terms, but not willingly. He spent the next week trying to find lawyers who would take his case, but every attorney he consulted told him the same thing: he had no legal standing, and fighting me would only make things worse. The public apology he posted on Facebook was half-hearted and bitter, but it was enough to satisfy my requirements. Watching him admit publicly that he had tried to steal from his own father was deeply satisfying. The drug rehabilitation program was harder for him to accept, but when his probation officer explained that it was either rehab or jail time for the drug charges, he finally agreed to enter a 90-day inpatient program. Getting a job proved to be the biggest challenge. Marcus had been out of work for so long that his resume was essentially blank. But I had connections in the construction industry, and I was able to get him hired as a day laborer with a crew that specialized in restoration projects. The work was hard, physical, and paid only $12 an hour. At that rate, it would take Marcus about 15 years to pay back the $84,000 he owed me. But I didn't care about the money anymore, I cared about the lesson. You might think that getting my house back and having Marcus arrested was revenge enough. But you would be wrong. The real revenge was much more subtle and much more devastating. See, Marcus had always been proud of his intelligence. He thought he was smarter than his old man, smarter than the system, smart enough to manipulate everyone around him. His entire identity was built on the belief that he could outsmart anyone. So I made sure that everyone knew exactly how stupid he had been. I reached out to every single person in Marcus's social circle, his friends, his ex-girlfriends, his former co-workers, even his high school acquaintances, and I told them the story. Not to hurt him, but to make sure they understood what kind of person he really was. I just wanted you to know, I would say, that if Marcus ever asks to stay with you or borrow money, you should know that he spent 2 years stealing from his own father and trying to steal his house. The social humiliation was devastating. Marcus's friends abandoned him one by one as they realized he was a user and a thief. His ex-girlfriend Sarah, who he had been trying to win back, blocked him on all social media after I showed her the evidence of his drug dealing. But the most satisfying revenge came from something I didn't even plan. Remember Tyler, the drug dealer who had been using my house as his base of operations? Well, it turned out that Tyler had been keeping detailed records of his business activities, including payments to Marcus for use of the house. When the police arrested Tyler during a separate investigation, they found those records. Marcus was charged as an accessory to drug trafficking. His lawyer friend, the first-year law student, couldn't help him with felony charges. Marcus had to hire a real attorney, which cost him the little money he had managed to save. And when the case went to court, the judge was not sympathetic to a man who had been running a drug operation out of his father's house. Marcus was sentenced to 18 months in prison. As I write this story, Marcus has been in prison for 6 months. He writes me letters sometimes, apologizing and begging for forgiveness. He says he understands now how wrong he was, how much he hurt me, and how grateful he is for everything I did for him over the years. I believe him. Prison has a way of giving people perspective. But I also know that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean there shouldn't be consequences. Marcus stole 2 years of my life. He turned my home into a drug den. He humiliated me, threatened me, and tried to steal everything I had worked for. The fact that he was my son doesn't excuse any of that, it makes it worse. When he gets out of prison, he'll still owe me $84,000. He'll still have a felony record that will make finding good employment difficult. He'll still have to live with the knowledge that everyone in town knows what he did to his father. But here's the thing, I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing this because I love him. Marcus needed to learn that actions have consequences. He needed to understand that he couldn't manipulate and steal his way through life. He needed to develop work ethic, personal responsibility, and respect for others. The hard way was the only way he was going to learn.